Welcome to a special roundtable episode of Inside the Vatican with Colleen, Dulle, Gerard O'Connell, and me, Ricardo da Silva, the producers of this podcast. As you've likely heard by now, Pope Francis died at 7:35 a.m. Rome time on Monday, April 21st. The Church has now entered a 9-day mourning period, and we're recording this on Tuesday, April 22nd. I've managed to steal Gerry and Colleen away from their reporting and media appearances for a wide ranging conversation on Pope Francis's nearly 13-year papacy. So let's get right into it. I know you all have many commitments to be moving on to. Gerry, you've known Pope Francis for 20 years. You've followed him from his years as Archbishop Bergoglio in Argentina. He baptized both your children. You were there for his election when he said Buonasera uh, at, on the balcony of St. Peter's. And you've been at almost every one of his international trips, made private visits to see him at the guest house where he lives at the Vatican. What stays with you on this second day as we mourn the death of Pope Francis?
Well, what stays with me is that we've lost a friend on earth and we've gained one in heaven. That's what
Yeah.
remains with me. I've just come from seeing his body
Mm.
in the chapel where we assisted at his masses on various occasions. Uh, my last viewing of him alive was at 12:47 on Sunday when he came down in his jeep, and I was very close to him, and I had a close up, and I put a tweet, and I think we embedded it in the story. Well, that's my last image of him alive, and it was quite emotional going in today. I went with Elizabeth to visit him for the last time, and it was quite an emotional thing. It was our last period with him.
Mm. Gerry, I know he's a personal friend, and I watched some of your media appearances yesterday, and I could see the pain as you were trying to report faithfully at this time of his death. And I know that Elisabetta is also a personal friend, and she's also been on television. So this is demanding so much of you right now, and I'm so grateful for your time. Thank you. Colleen, you've been reporting on the Pope for a decade. You have a book coming out on this very soon. But your reporting's especially traced how Pope Francis opened the doors for women and lay people. You were in Rome for the Global Sexual Abuse Summit early in his papacy. We were there together last year for the Synod on Synodality with Gerry. It was the one time that as a team we were able to be together. Uh, and now, what is your abiding memory of Pope Francis?
On Easter Sunday, I was watching the live streams and everything, and I saw the pictures come in of him giving that blessing, the Urbi et Orbi, on the Loggia of Blessings. And for some reason, I just started thinking about the first time that we saw him there. Um, and I was in the car with my sister showing her the photos, and I said, I can't help but think about, this exact image, but 12 years ago, and how you could see the physical difference in, how the Pope had really given his all to the job, given us these whole final 12 years of his life, and really left nothing on the table, right? Like he worked till his dying day. And I guess that's one thing that's staying with me right now. Another thing that I just keep thinking of is um, the moment when he kissed the feet of the South Sudanese leaders and begged them to make peace. I think that the legacy of Francis is going to be one of strong, strong advocacy for peace. And again, we saw him calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, calling for peace, even on Easter Day in his last appearance.
Yeah, I was not fortunate enough to meet Pope Francis in person. I know Gerry tried on a few occasions, and I was in Lisbon for World Youth Day, where I got very, very close to him. But the abiding memory for me there has to be that refrain that will now be eternal. Todos, todos, todos. This is the church for all. His joy was palpable on those days. And it's a wonderful memory for me to carry as we go forward without Pope Francis, at least not Pope Francis in the flesh. Let's talk a little bit about Pope Francis's apostolic zeal, international apostolic zeal. He would often refer to himself as the world's parish priest. And so he made 47 trips, 47 apostolic trips, and on those trips he visited 67 countries. That's quite an achievement for someone who was 76 when he was elected pope. How did this shape his conviction of the papacy, Gerry?
Well, he came into the papacy believing that it was a journey of the bishop with his people. And on that very first night, he bowed before the people to ask them to bless him before he blessed them. And no pope in history has done that. And on Sunday, we saw the last thing he did from the balcony of St. Peter's was to give the blessing to the people, Urbi et Orbi, to the people of Rome and worldwide. That was the last thing we know the Pope did. The last words he said to the world and to the city of Rome. And then he drove among the people. And as I said, that's where I last saw him. But I saw that journey as a final journey of the Pope of the people. He's always wanted to be among the people. He said the leader should be sometimes in front, sometimes behind, sometimes in the middle of his people, but always with the people, not without the people. And his final message on Sunday was the hallmark, or let's say, the summary of what he did when he went to those 67 countries. It was the Pope among the people. He wasn't just going to visit the heads of state. He had to do that because by protocol nature. And they wanted him to come to them. But he was especially among the people. And we saw the remarkable effort he made in Papua New Guinea to go to the periphery of the peripheries, to be with the missionaries who were on the front line and with the people who were in the absolute peripheries. And I think that's going to be the legacy that the next Pope, his successor, will have to match. Is he going to be with the people or is he not? And the whole question of synodality is at the heart of this. Because synodality is the bishop, the pope, the cleric with the people, never without them. And I think this is the strength, this is the strong message that he has. Francis started processes. It is up to the successor to continue the processes.
And of course, Colleen, this was the Pope of surprises, right? He would have prepared texts and then he would remove the text and just preach extemporaneously or speak in the moment. He was also the Pope who did things that came as surprises. He was especially a Pope of gestures, much more than words. What do you make of this Pope who did so many things so visibly that were captured on camera, that were captured in the hearts and lives of people?
I think that Pope Francis was a big believer in the idea that actions speak louder than words. I think that for him, words were a second thing, but first let me make these gestures. First, like Gerry said, let me be among the people. Let me be close to people. I heard this quote from our colleague Henry Munsterman, who works for a Dutch Catholic paper. He said, "People came to Rome to see John Paul II, to listen to Benedict, but they came to Rome to touch Francis." And that always sticks with me. I think that Francis, we have so many iconic images of him going out and touching people, right? Like the famous image of him hugging the man who had the skin disease. And yeah, what do I make of it being full of surprises? I guess just that it shows that it came from the heart. You know, Francis would stop the popemobile and get out and go hug a baby. You know, he he did these things because he was inspired in the moment to do them and because he cared. And these aren't things that you script, right? I think that he was open and tried very hard to be open to the work of the Holy Spirit and to its promptings. And I think that those gestures were expressions of that like deep spirituality and spiritual discipline of listening that he had cultivated throughout his Jesuit life.
As a Jesuit, I think there's a particular read here, which is from the exercises of St. Ignatius Loyola, the spiritual exercises. Love is shown more in deeds than in words, right? And that's how he showed his love, was by his proximity and his unique ability to draw people toward him. Gerry, he was also known as this Pope of Joy. Uh, you know, uh, Evangelii Gaudium, the joy of the gospel, was the title of one of his encyclicals. And how does that joy transmit? He would say to people, don't look like, he would say to priests, don't look like you're going to a funeral. And he would say to the people to exude joy as well, that there are Christians who lead their lives seemingly like they're living in Lent and not in Easter. Kind of fitting for the time that he died. He died on Easter Monday, Monday of the Resurrection. What of his joy?
Well, I think it's very interesting that the last message that he gave to the world, which was read by the Master of Ceremonies, Bishop Ravelli, on Sunday, he said in that message, he said, Easter is a celebration of life. He said, Christ is not in the tomb, he's alive. And Francis was forever conveying this message, and he's saying, this is why we're joyful, because death and all the negative things in history have been overcome. There's still evil in the world, he said in the final message. There's still evil, but he says it does not have the last word, and we have to live in the consciousness that this is what our faith is about. And I felt very strongly that message last Sunday when he'd given his life for people, basically. And here he was giving his last physical effort to be with people. He met J.D. Vance. Now, J.D. Vance was well known. Everybody knew here that he had been critical of Francis and Francis' statements. And yet, if you look at the picture of him meeting J.D. Vance, there was something very moving about that picture. I wonder what that meeting will have done to J.D. Vance as a believer.
Mm.
I think only time will tell. But he cannot but have been touched by the generosity of man in the last hours of his life, as it proved to be, willing to meet and shake hands with him and give him Easter eggs for his 3 children. There's something joyful about this. And it's also a statement that differences, you can get over them. And like John 23rd said, we focus on the things that unite us, that not on what divides us. And Francis was very much the messenger of that way of living the Christian faith.
Yeah, I mean, Pope Francis didn't only open the church doors, right? In many ways, Vatican II did that. It sort of opened the window into the world. Pope Francis's mission was to go out into the world, right, at the margins, and nowhere more poignantly, perhaps, than his very first apostolic visit to Lampedusa. when he went out to see the migrants lost at sea, and really, with that, announced what this papacy was going to be about. Of course, he reached out to so many other people on the margins, but let's talk about his concern for migrants and the poor. Colleen?
Sure. I mean, there's so much to say, right? But I think that it's easy to see, and I saw this when I was reporting from Argentina last year, that Pope Francis's concern for the poor and those on the margins is very much rooted in his own background. He is, as he often reminded us, the grandson of immigrants. He always talked about, his grandparents who could have themselves been lost at sea, right? They were scheduled to go on a ship that ended up drowning, sinking, and instead they made it safely, on a different ship that they by chance got to go on. Um, but all this to say that I think that Francis was never far from the idea that, it could be him. He even said this after he left the prison on Holy Thursday. When he was getting in the car, he said to reporters, he said, "Every time I go through these doors at this prison, I ask myself, why is it them and not me?" And so I think that that really informed him, and, yeah, what more can I say, I could list examples. I think, we've talked about how he was so close to the people living in the slums in Buenos Aires.
Yeah, he was known as the Pope of the Slums, right? As in
Mhm, and yeah, like
Sorry, he
having
was known as the Bishop of the Slums in Argentina.
right, and became their pope. I mean, you go there today and there are pictures of Francis everywhere. There are things named after Francis everywhere. Everyone's got a connection to him they wanna talk about. Um Yeah, so just all that to say that I think it was a very deeply held and long-lasting commitment that he had to the poor. And of course, we remember that Cardinal Hummus, leaned over to him after he got the requisite number of votes to be elected pope and reminded him, "Don't forget the poor." And I think that stuck with him too.
Yeah, that advice that was whispered in his ear really set the line of his papacy, the way that he would move forward as a pope. He visited the US-Mexico border, I think at Ciudad Juarez, on one of his trips. He brought refugee families back home from Lesbos. And then, most recently, of course, his sharp critique of anti immigrant policies in the US, especially, but also across Europe. We know that one of his final major interventions as Pope was this letter that he wrote to US bishops denouncing mass deportations and reaffirming what he calls this drama of migration. Uh, Gerry, how do we understand Pope Francis's interventions not only with the poor and for the poor, but also on behalf of the poor with world leaders and the world's most powerful?
Well, he started from the very fundamental point of Christian belief that we're all children of God. Whatever nationality, whatever color, whatever religion, we're still all children of God. And this was his baseline. And when he went to the world leaders and talked to them, he always started with the idea that the world leader, he wanted to get beyond what was the political position that particular leader had or espoused or was driving through. And he wanted to get to the heart of the leader. What behind those words was the man or woman feeling in their hearts? And Francis was known for cardiognosis, the reading of the heart, the knowledge of the heart of the people. And that's what he really tried to do. He tried to do it with Erdogan in Turkey when he took him into his 1,000-room palace. He tried to do it with Netanyahu in Israel, who, when after seeing him touch the wall in Bethlehem, was furious and wanted to take him straight to see the tombs of some of the Israeli martyrs. And he wanted to get behind that anger, that political position to see what's in the man's heart, what's in the woman's heart. And sometimes he succeeded, and sometimes he found that he was against walls. But his message was fundamental. They're still children of God. And the people they are governing are God's children. And they have a dignity which nobody can put aside, which nobody can eliminate, nobody can demolish. And that was his message from start to finish. And I think it's interesting. Colleen mentioned about the migration and his approach to it. Look at what he said in his last message on Sunday, where he's saying, you people come in and they have different customs, different ways of life to you. You know, these are your brothers and sisters. Basically, that's what he was telling them. And the encyclical Fratelli Tutti, which Cardinal Cerny uh, translated as siblings all. But really, what the message is, we, like it or not, even if we don't understand it, that is the basic fact. Humanity is one family, and we're brothers and sisters in that one family, and there is one God who is Father.
Pope Francis will be known as the Pope who repeatedly appealed for a reform to environmental justice, to bring about greater environmental justice and care, concern for climate change and the fact that this is destroying the planet for our children. Of course, he's known for our children. I don't have any children, but for our children beyond that. So with Laudato Si, he reframed this environmental crisis that we are experiencing as a moral and spiritual challenge, not just for Catholics. And so, he repeatedly addressed climate change conferences of the UN, assemblies of the UN. Colleen, what lasting impact do you think he's going to have in terms of his advocacy for the environment?
Well, I remember a really interesting episode of Inside the Vatican that we did a few years ago now, maybe 5 years ago, where we spoke to two sociology students from Princeton University. Sorry, one sociology, one political science. And they had done research that actually quantified the impact that Laudato Si had on especially American Catholics, but also non Catholics, views of climate change as an urgent and important issue and as a moral issue. And on both fronts, Francis did shift public opinion with Laudato Si, they were able to say. And I think that's likewise true. We heard that Laudato Si made a huge impact at the Paris Climate Summit in 2015. It ultimately led to the climate agreement being signed. So, I mean, Francis was a voice that people really listened to. I think that his reframing of climate change, not as just kind of an abstract scientific issue, but as one of justice, as one that's tied in with problems of inequality, as a sin that wealthier nations are participating in that then negatively impacts people living in poorer nations. That was revolutionary. It made people mad, especially in the US. I remember people were saying, what what does the Pope know about this? Why should we listen to him? And yet people did listen to him. And it made a very big difference. And I hope that his repeated messages, including Laudate Deum, the follow up to Laudato Si, continues to be heeded because there has been progress, but there has not been enough. And in some cases, there's been backsliding.
And this was the way he connected with young people. He
Absolutely.
said, we're talking about your future. I'm an old man. He said several times, I'm an old man. But we're talking about your future and your grandchildren. And I remember when we went to Papua New Guinea, the chiefs of some of the islands came to meet him there. And some of their islands risk being obliterated with climate change.
Hmm.
And Francis was very conscious, these people may not have a home or even an existence if we don't tackle climate change. And he showed a great patience with the climate deniers, but he wouldn't pull back 1 millimeter from saying, sorry, but you are misreading science and history and the future.
Mm.
He was very, I think, so clear and he had the input of such a galaxy of scientists at the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. He had them, I saw them, I listened to some of them at these conferences. He had the top Nobel Prize winners, top recognized scientists from different countries who were saying, yes, you are right. The deniers have still to learn what reality is.
And Jerry, just to jump quickly off of that point that you made about young people, I mean, this is something that's really stuck out to me in these recent days is just seeing the outpouring of love for this pope from, many young people who are not affiliated with any religion at all, who are maybe disengaged with the Catholic Church, disillusioned with it. I mean, I write in my book that I too am disillusioned with it to an extent, even though I'm still here. Um, but Francis was able, with his humility, I think, especially, and his concern for justice, to reach out to young people in a way that young people had not seen in any pope in their lifetime.
Well, he was a bearer of ideals. And those ideals were deep in the heart of the Christian faith. And young people, they recognize, you rightly said, because every country I went to, and I spoke to many young people in these countries, I asked them, what really impresses you about this Pope? And almost unanimously, the first thing they said is humility.
Hmm.
He never put himself above anybody, never. And secondly, his concern for the poor. Those were, I would say, the two most common uh, aspects of Francis's life that kept recurring in affirmation of young people in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in Sri Lanka, in the Philippines, in Indonesia. I mean, where can you find a leader? Indonesia, I'm talking about, a country, the largest Muslim population in the world, where the Muslims, young Muslims, going on their knees when Francis was passing by or reaching out to try and touch him. What is there? And they recognized there was some they saw him as a holy man, a man of God, but there was something. It was extraordinary to see when the planes were taking off and these people going on their knees. Uh, I think I think there's a lot still to be absorbed from this pontificate. I've said here on the program before, Francis as Pope, in Rome, he had an official agenda. What he did in the morning, it was public, it was published by the Vatican press office, you knew who he saw, etc. What people didn't see is what he did in the afternoon with his private agenda. And I think there's a whole new world of compassion, of love, of courage, of extraordinary reaching out that is still hidden from the world. Just as in Argentina, when he was Jesuit provincial, immediately he was elected, he was accused of having betrayed two Jesuits. And only what came out much later was how many times he risked his own life to save the lives of people under military dictatorship. That whole other hidden Francis.
We haven't even begun to speak about his care for people who are lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual, and the visits that he had at the Vatican monthly with transgender individuals. We haven't even spoken, Colleen and I. Maybe we can have another conversation about his role when it comes to the inclusion of women and how he created spaces for women. But perhaps one of the things that stays with me is a message that he gave from his hospital bed, where he said, "The absurdity of war from here." You know, from the vantage point of his hospital bed, he sees even more the absurdity of war. And we know that he called the parish priest in Gaza continuously throughout his 38-day hospital stay. Gerry, we can't leave this conversation, and Colleen, we can't leave this conversation without talking about his impact on the global stage in terms of war and peace efforts. Of course, especially in terms of Ukraine and Gaza.
When he became Pope, the war in Syria was going on, and it's still not completely eliminated. And then we got the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and then we got the demolition of democracy in Myanmar, and then you got the igniting of the war in Sudan. And then, of course, we have the terrible situation in Gaza and in the Holy Land. And Francis, I was struck reading his final testimony. He said, "I offer my sufferings for peace in the world and for fraternity between peoples." And his final message from the balcony on Sunday was on stop the killing, release the hostages, provide aid to a starving people, peace in Ukraine, peace in Democratic Republic of the Congo, in Sudan, in Myanmar. From start to finish, he was an advocate for peace and harmony. I think, as I said, I was touched by that final testimony. I was also touched by the other thing, is that, when he was elected Pope, he went and paid his bill the next day to the hotel. And now, the day he dies, we learn that the bill for his funeral is not going to the Vatican. It's being paid by a benefactor. And this is Francis, classic Francis, from start to finish.
Right, and continuing with this theme of him being the Pope of the people, he is not going to be buried at the Vatican. He's going to be buried at Santa Maria Maggiore, the place where we saw him go pray so often. Uh, Even during this convalescence period, he stopped by and prayed there unexpectedly. And I feel like that's also maybe part of his effort to be close to the people and close to the places that have meant so much to him. You won't have to stand in line at the Vatican to see him. You might have to stand in line for a while at Santa Maria Maggiore now. But I just think that that's really special, and that he requested in his classic kind of austere style that, it just be a simple grave in the ground with a stone over the top that just says Franciscus on it, no extra ornamentation. We already saw him simplify the papal funeral rites. All of this, pointing to the fact that it wasn't about him. It was about so much more. It was about fraternity. It was about God's love and mercy. And I think it communicates that the way to keep his memory alive is to work for those things.
Hmm. And it's fitting that he is going to be buried at Maria Maggiore, right? Before the icon of Santa Maria Salus Populi Romani, sort of lying before the people. His pious devotion to Our Lady, which places him so close to the prayers of the people and the way that the people pray. So fitting. Colleen, Gerry, you are my colleagues, but you are also dear friends. I know these are going to be difficult days. I also know that these are days of great joy as we celebrate Easter. What a fitting time for our Pope to die with the resurrection of the Lord. And so let us continue in these days prayerfully, but also in gratitude to you for the work that you're going to be doing in service of God's people and of Pope Francis' legacy. And I hope that in the coming weeks and months on this show, we will continue to unpack Pope Francis' legacy, because there is so much that was not said. This was by no means comprehensive. It was really just a way of connecting the dots on some of the major themes of Pope Francis' papacy. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Gerry.